People that are in positions of influence in 2 years' time will not be there. Now, we didn't know for sure all that meant. We're very hopeful that it meant a change at the top, and praise God, that's exactly what's happened. And so we are just super thrilled about that. We know that God has great plans for America, great plans for you and for all of us who call on His name. And so super excited. But folks, we have the best of the best with us tonight as our special guest, our Truth and Liberty board member, the founder of Wall Builders, and a man who I say is just an American treasure. David Barton is joining us tonight, and just needs no introduction. David, thank you for joining us here on the program. It's great to see you again.
Thanks, Richard. Good to be with you. Always, matter of fact, it's always great to be with. Thanks for having me.
Oh, thank you. Well, you were part of the very special team on Flashpoint last night with America Stands. We broadcast that stream live from Truth and Liberty's website, and I watched a good deal of it. What a great night it was. Watching those returns come in, there were a few. Some of that was sort of a nail-biting moment there, and you know, it was great watching the folks on the set there begin to call on the name of the Lord and confess by faith the victory. You know, as some of us got a sinking feeling in our stomach. Oh no, here we go again. It seemed like as it was midnight before they called Pennsylvania, and you've got shenanigans going on with people driving in with California plates, dumping off ballots in Philadelphia and all sorts of other stuff. But the Lord prevailed. What was it like for you there as you were watching the returns come in and eventually saw that it got called for Donald Trump?
You know, when it started, we all kind of gave our predictions of what we thought might happen for the night, because when we did the coverage in 2016, I think it was around 1 or 1:30, Michelle Bachmann and I called the race, and actually we were the first network to call it, and Trump was actually tweeting that out in this race. But we called it back in 2016, then we got to 2020, and we saw, we were going late in the morning, and we saw all the machines in all the states shut down at the same time for 3 hours. And we said, oh, there's a steal going on here. And so this one, my analysis at the start was, it's either going to be a night that's fairly short in the sense that my analysis was, if Trump gets up, not 1 or 2 points in North Carolina, but if he's up 5 or 6 points in North Carolina, then he's probably going to take those East Coast battleground states, and that's going to be your Georgia, and that's going to be your Pennsylvania, North Carolina. And if he does that, it's going to be a short night, because if he gets those 3 off the East Coast, he's essentially done. If everything else stays red and blue like it does, polarized as we are, if he gets those 3 states, it's over. And so it's either going to be that or it's going to be a really long night. And it turned out that by 10 o'clock, I knew he had won, because at that point, not only did he have really doing well in Georgia, really doing well in Pennsylvania, and doing well in North Carolina, but even Virginia was still in play. And Virginia was in play right down to the 20 minutes before it flipped. So with that kind of stuff on the East Coast, I really felt like he was going to do really well. I think last night at 12:11 Central Time, as we were going off the air, we called it for sure. And then about 20 minutes later, they announced that Pennsylvania had indeed gone there, which was the third one he needed, put him over the top, or put him at 270, which he needed. So it was really a short night, considering the presidential election, considering all that's gone into it, considering the fact that you still got Arizona. It's only about 55% votes counted in Arizona. I mean, there's just a lot of votes still being counted, and we already know the outcome of the election, with several states still not having called the results yet. We've got 4 U.S. senators have not been called. We've got 35 House members not been called. We know the Senate will go Republican. We don't know where the House will go yet. I think it will go Republican. I think we'll probably come out of it with, I don't know, anywhere 6, 7, 8 seats extra. But we won't know that for a while, and some of that may take a week to get the results in some of those House seats.
Well, Dave, going into these presidential elections, there's a lot of talk about swing states, and then among those swing states, the blue wall, so-called, of Pennsylvania, Michigan, and Wisconsin. And it looks to me now, we don't know Arizona yet, but if Trump wins Arizona and Nevada, he's leading right now, it looks like by almost 5 points, based on what I saw just before coming on the air with, I think Arizona, as you said, is about 50% counted, 55, and Nevada's 60-something% counted. If he wins those, it'll be a clean sweep of all of the swing states. That's pretty significant, isn't it?
It was, and that's one of the things we reported last night, probably around 10:30 or 11 Central Time, is that New York Times had said that Trump's going to win all 7 swing states. And, for the New York Times to admit that, I was struck last night with the exit polling, how little trickled out and how slow it was, which told me that we're probably doing really, really good. Because the outfits that do exit polling tend to be liberal, and they were just not releasing things. They were not releasing what the vote looked like, or who was voting, or how Hispanics were voting, how blacks were voting, how men or women were voting, how people of faith were. They just weren't releasing the numbers. And even at midnight, they were still slowly releasing, trickle by trickle, one aspect or another. And that also told me that they probably, from the exit polling numbers, knew that they were in trouble. Actually, we saw a tweet across the night I think it was about 10 o'clock Central Time. It said that by New York Times prediction, this is going to be a landslide for Trump. And I think electorally, it won't be what we call a landslide, but it will be a modern landslide. With the polarized states that we have right now, for him to come out with 300 or more votes is significant in this climate in the last 2 to 3 decades.
It really is. And right now, without Nevada, everything's called as far as the presidential race except Nevada and Arizona, right? And so
right.
He's sitting at 295 or somewhere right there.
That's right.
And Kamala's down at 220-ish. I can't remember the exact numbers, but if he picks up...
She's got 223 and he's sitting at 294.
All right. So if he picks up the 16 electoral votes from the 2 remaining states, that puts him at 310 to 220. That's pretty resounding victory.
And I think they went ahead and called Maine 2 for him as well. Maine has been sitting out because that's one of the 2 divided states where the state doesn't go to the winner. Each congressional district goes to the winner. And so Nebraska, I think he ended up with all 3 in Nebraska. But Maine, as of early this morning, was still split. CD2 had not been declared Republican yet. So we'll see if he picks up one more electoral vote out of Maine. And I didn't look right when we went on the air, but I don't think Maine's been called yet, or Maine 2 has been called yet.
Well, there was a lot of talk on the, during last night's coverage and on some of the things I was watching about a real shift in the electorate, a real sea change as far as, our country goes. And, I think sometimes in the excitement of election night, people tend to overstate these things. But when you see, 30% of black men voting for Trump, that's kind of astounding, isn't it? And
yeah, it's there were a lot of things that shifted last night, and I think we got some indication of that. And backing up a little inside politics here, Trump did something that had never before been done, and I'm going to say since 1854 when the Republican Party was founded. And so what he did was a huge gamble. It worked. It won. It will reshape politics for at least the next decade, because everyone else will try to do the same thing. I don't know if it's going to work. He has a personality with such a high name ID that he didn't have all the media. But instead of having the parties, all 50 states, do turnout, turn out the Republicans in Colorado and Texas, whatever, Trump said, I don't want the parties doing that. He said, I will take care of the turnout. He said, I'll do that. I'll do the rallies. Parties leave it alone. He said, I want you to do the legal stuff. I want you to have all the legal stuff ready to go, and you get all the ground stuff. You get the ground teams. And so that was a big gamble. And I will say, to the credit of Michael Watley, he was quick jumping into legal battles. I mean, in Pennsylvania yesterday, when the machine shut down for a little bit, I mean, it wasn't minutes till he had a judge ordering 2 hours more of staying open, and then 4 hours more of staying open in Clallam County, which had machine trouble. I mean, he was all over everything, and that aspect kind of goes back to what Karl Rove did with George Bush in 2000, where they had legal strike teams. He put legal strike teams in all the battleground states to have them there on the ground, ready to file suits. And so last night was very clean. And the other thing I think that's really significant is, particularly in churches, and Chad Connolly's a good friend with Faith Wins, we were all over the nation since July. And part of what we were doing was getting churches to get people who would be trained to be poll watchers. Because as a trained poll watcher credentialed by the state, you can go in and see those things. So when, you know, Fulton County, Atlanta, 4 years ago, nobody could go in because they weren't poll watchers. They were just observers. But once you get trained as a poll watcher, you put eyes on the process and they can't shut you out. And so thousands and thousands of church people were trained as poll watchers. We placed them in some of the most critical areas and some of the hardest areas to be. And having Christian eyeballs on the process is really important. It's bringing light on the process. Bill Bennett, who used to be the Secretary of Education for Ronald Reagan, said sunlight's the best disinfectant. And I still believe that's true. Sunlight is the best disinfectant. And so when you have, and last night when the county in Pennsylvania said, hey, it's long enough, it's late in the night, we're going home, get some rest. And Michael Watley had the legal teams on it, and within minutes said no. The judge said, no, you're going to stay and count all night. You're not going home. And so I think that was a huge gamble by Trump to do that. I think Watley executed very well, and the states executed very well. A lot of the state parties did not do a good job, but stepping in, you had Faith Wins that did a great job. And that's the other thing that Trump did that was brand new. Instead of having the parties do turnout, he went to Ralph Reed, the Faith and Freedom Coalition. He went to Susan B. Anthony list. He went to Turning Point USA. He went to these outside groups and said, get the turnout. And so I know, talking to Ralph Reed, he knocked on 8.4 million doors doing door knocking, 4.6 million for Susan B. Anthony, all these other places. So they really had a very good ground game, and they had Trump doing the rally stuff, which, you know, he's 79 years old. He's tireless. I mean, he leave most 20-year-olds gasping for breath. And so it was a perfect storm in that sense. And so we'll see going forward whether states feel like they have to remake their party, whether they're going to go back to what they've been doing for the last 60 or 70 years, whether this idea of farming stuff out to subcontractors, Turning Point USA and others is the way to go. It's a brand new model. It proved really effective this time. It could have been a great disaster, but God's blessing was there, and it was super effective. And again, I did not expect what I saw out of Watley at the RNC, but he was super, super aggressive. And I know he's shooting for a spot in Trump's administration. He's not planning to be at the RNC long term. He was there for this race and then plans to move on. But nonetheless, that's a little inside politics, maybe more than what anybody else wants. But that was part of what went with this thing that I think really was effective.
Well, you know, that's an awesome explanation, and it helps a lot. In 2020, it seemed like that Trump and the Republicans were just really not prepared for the level of I'm just going to call them shenanigans, you know, that went on how the election was basically stolen, but you know, late in getting his legal stuff together and sloppy when it was done, and all of those kinds of things. And of course, we know the result of that, but it seemed like this time around was very different. And do you think that it had a major, it wasn't that the Debs didn't try to do the same tricks this time, it's just that they couldn't quite get it done like they had last time. Is that partly true when it comes to integrity, election integrity?
I think that's partly true, but the other thing that helped us was those 7 battleground states. 5 of those 7 battleground states made significant legislative changes to the election process. And the changes made in Arizona were substantial. The 2 states that didn't make changes were Nevada and Michigan. And Michigan is still abysmal. The fact that Trump pulled that out with 1%, given what that Secretary of State of, and let me just explain what I mean by that. She certified the voting list just a few months ago, I think it was, and the voting list is 8.4 million voters in Michigan. The problem is Michigan only has 7.9 million who are of voting age. You got more than 500,000 people on there. And so
how can she certify it?
Exactly. And so, and doing that, again, working with Chad Connolly and Faith Wins, went up there and got Christians and got Sunday school classes, put eyeballs on the voting list, because we're coming up on an election. Let's look and see. And so told them that the 2 things to look for, Chad was real clear, look for people over 100 years old who are on the active voter list. Not that they can't be, but you really ought to be breathing if you're going to vote. You know, make sure you're alive. And so let's check and see. And anytime you have more than 6 people registered at one address, let's check that. And so they went down the voting rolls, and because it's all public record, they said, we want you to print out everyone who's over 100 years old. And so the lists come out in 100 names on each page. So 100 people on one page that are 100 years old and still voting, et cetera. And so in going through it, in the first 2 pages, which means the first 200 people, they found 67 who had online obituaries who have been dead and they're still voting, but it's after their obituaries. And we found a guy named Jason Daniel. Jason was out of Flint, Michigan, and he voted twice in 2020. Jason was born in 1850, and the dude's still voting 170 years later. He's still. So we actually took that to the Secretary of State, and she sued the state of Michigan to keep dead people on the voter rolls. Why would you keep dead people on the voter? She sued the state of Michigan to do that. And then after having sued the state of Michigan to do that, she had pressure put on her because you have to clean your, federal law requires you to clean your voter list for every election. She said, well, I'm going to do it in 2027. I mean, that's what she announced. I'm going to, wait a minute, you've got an election coming up and you're going to do it in 20. So when you look at Michigan, the fact that Trump won that at all is just awesome. And that was one of the places where we saw the California cars come in at the license plates to Detroit and start delivering boxes last night at midnight. And so, you know, that was one of the, and the fact that he's come out winning that. But again, we had so many eyeballs on the ground. We had gone through so many lists. We had worked that so hard. And Watley was there with legal help when needed. So I think that was very significant. Nevada, I don't think they have the same level of, how do I say, mafia voting set up, you know, where that it's organized. I don't think that Nevada was nearly as organized as Michigan was in trying to affect the vote. And to that end, you saw the people of Nevada overcome the system there. They made no election changes. They made it really difficult to get election integrity. They made it really difficult. But that was another place where we went in the churches in Nevada with Chad, and we got all these Christians in Nevada signed up to be poll watchers, to be in the places that are the toughest, Clark County and other precincts. And so I think that was a huge, huge impact. And again, I'll point to churches on that and say that was a really big deal. But I think that is why we didn't see the shenanigans in those states. And the other thing, you know, the founding fathers tended to be, theologically speaking, they tended to be of Reformed theology, which today that we would kind of say Calvinism. I mean, even the Baptist churches back then were Reformed theology. And so one of the things that's really strong in Reformed theology is the depravity of man. It's Jeremiah 17:9. Founding fathers talked about that verse. The heart of man is desperately wicked. Who can know it? Well, in progressive stuff, you're taught that everybody is nice and you expect the best of everybody. And, you know, and I think that's kind of what they thought in 2020. Nobody's going to try to steal that big. I mean, nobody has the chutzpah to try to do what they did in 20. Well, this time they were a lot more like Reformed Calvinists. They believed in the depravity of man and they were prepared for it. And so they went in expecting a steal and being ready for it, which I think that's a really smart thing to do. They had a whole different viewpoint of what might be done than what they had 4 years ago.
Well, so do you expect that the new Congress and the Trump administration are going to pass some election reform laws at a national level?
No, there's not much they can do at a national level. Article 2, Section 2 says the time, place, and manners of elections belong to the states. And so even in looking at things that we really want to see changed, that has to go to the states to do that. That was one of the things that came up even with some reporters last night saying, why can't you? And it's real simple. You can't because the Constitution won't let you. It's the states that determine. And by the way, just, you know, we're griping here about not getting the election results maybe for 2 or 3 days from and it was Arizona that announced it's going to be 10 to 13 days before they can get all the election results in. Well, I'm going to go back to Thomas Jefferson and John Adams ran against each other. And the presidential election lasted, I think, almost 8 months. And so you would know the states determine when they're going to do presidential election. Now, we've got in the Constitution now that all the states have to report it by a certain time. And it would take a constitutional amendment to be able to do it again. But we have that constitutional amendment that says, no, January the 6th, everything's got to be certified, turned in. But literally back then, South Carolina said, well, we'll do our presidential elections in March. And Massachusetts said, well, we're going to take August. And I mean, it was that far apart. It was months apart. And so Jefferson, in the meantime, would write to another state and said, hey, we just lost over here, Virginia. Virginia didn't go the way we wanted. Help us get North Carolina, send people in. And so they literally were running campaigns state by state by state because the Constitution does not allow the federal government to choose election times, manners, or places. And so it would be really difficult. We might like it better, but we really don't want to give more power to the federal government. That's for sure.
Well, we don't, but how else are we going to bring, fairness and integrity to these blue states?
Well, I was in one of the battleground states, and we were doing a bunch of churches up there, and one of the election groups up there pointed out that in that particular blue state, that Christians said, we can't turn. This is a blue state. It's got a blue governor. And less than 10% of Christians voted in the 2022 election. Now, there's more Christians than that. There's enough Christians in that state. We know there are to be able to switch that. And if I can go back, something did at Faith Wins, I'm going to go back to the last election in 2020. So in that election, 2020, took 5 states, took Georgia, took Pennsylvania, took Nevada, went through 5 battleground states that were all key where it came down to it. And we said, okay, if you look, for example, I think Arizona, the margin of victory for Biden was 0.23%. I think it was 10,700 votes was the difference of victory. And we identified 2.7 million evangelicals in Arizona that did not vote last election. So you needed 11,000 votes to flip that state. And there were 2.7 million. And we went through geofence and did all the stuff and said, we want to find out who in the state did not vote, that is pro-life, pro-marriage, pro-Israel, pro-guns, pro-religious liberty, went all that and found 2.7. And it was the same. There were 4.4 million in Pennsylvania that did not vote, that were what we would call evangelical Christians. Down in Georgia, it was, I think, 2.9 million. I mean, it was not even close in any state. And if those people who didn't vote 4 years ago would show up at any point in time, they could own every state in the United States. There's just no question about it. And they get talked, and that's one of the things we did a month ago. We commissioned 2 really big polls with George Barton. It made a lot of national news. And what we found in the first one was, just for people of faith, 55 million said, I'm setting this election out. When it came to evangelicals, it was 32 million said, I'm not going to vote in this election. So we would ask them, why not? Why are you not going to vote? And then we would ask them, what would cause you to vote? What influences might cause you to change your mind? And so when we looked at the aspect of why are you not voting, it was, well, one of the top answers was, well, my vote just doesn't make a difference. And another answer was, I just don't like either one of the candidates. And another answer was, well, their agenda is not what I think is the most important. Listen, you're going to be under one of them. You better weigh in on one or the other. It doesn't have to be your agenda, and I'm sorry it's not. But you're going to get one of their agendas. Which one do you want to live under, or which one do you not want to live under the most? And so they were all really lousy answers. The thing about my vote doesn't count, it's interesting that since 2022, I grabbed this, since 2022, we're only talking 2 years.
2 years.
There have been more than 800 elections in the United States decided by 1 vote or less. They were either ties or 1 vote. How do you know your vote's not going to make a difference? How do you know you're not the one that was needed in those 800 elections? And so this thing of predetermining that my vote will make a difference, people have believed that lie, and that's why blue states are blue, because we have absolutely documented there's enough evangelicals in every one of those states to turn any of them if they would simply get involved. But they've let the enemy talk them into being uninvolved. And I don't care whether you win or not, because my thing is John Quincy Adams, duty is ours, results are God's. I'm going to be involved in every election, even if I lose every one of them. Even if I know going in I'm going to lose the election, you're going to see me doing what I can do myself. I'm going to make sure and vote, because when I stand before God, I don't want to be like Matthew 25 and Luke 19, where he says, I gave you something to do and you didn't do anything with it. He says, wicked and slothful servant. And I don't want to be called wicked and slothful by the master. If I've got 1 vote, you better make sure I'm going to use that 1 vote. And that's something that most Christians do not think about or understand right now. So even in blue states, it is not far-fetched to say that we could easily change those states if we could get Christians involved, get pastors talking, get others. That's the other thing. We found that only 40% of pastors even mention voting in an election. So you got 60% of American pastors who never even said anything like "go be salt and light," go vote this election. Not telling you who to vote for. Get yourself a voter's guide and find out who you want to vote for, but go vote. And we found, by the way, that 17% of those who did not vote said, if my pastor told me it was important for me to go vote, I would go vote. 17%. My goodness, we're talking another 3 million votes right there. I mean, that'll change all sorts of states, 3 million votes. So that's a long explanation to your answer, but I don't even worry about blue states anymore. I worry about Christians, because if Christians would get involved, we wouldn't have the blue-red divide that we often have right now. We wouldn't be talking parties. We would be talking Christian and pagan, basically, is what it, or biblical and pagan. I want to say Christian, because Judeo-Christian, all of that is fine, but we'd be talking God kind of values versus secular kind of values. And that's the big divide in America, is secularism versus God-fearing kind of folks.
It is the fundamental divide, isn't it, that leads to all the other problems. Well, Dave, everybody in our circles heard about the Barna survey when it came out, and it's sort of, Charlie Kirk said it's a 5-alarm fire. We've got to do something here.
Yeah.
And I'm wondering, did the response to that make a difference? Was Christian turnout in this election, do we know yet, was it as low as what the survey was predicting, or maybe a little bit better, worse? What do you know at this point?
Well, that's a fun question, and there's several different possibilities for answers to it. So one was people like Chad and me, since July the 1st, we did 129 pastor meetings since July the 1st. And it was all about that Barna message. You've got to get your people out. You have to get them registered. You have to tell them it's important. You have to provide them a voter's guide. So it's very possible that moved the needle, because we're talking thousands and thousands and thousands of pastors. The average church size is about 70 people. So if you're taking average church size, thousands, that's several million. That's possible. So that could have helped. A lot of other people picked up on that Barna poll and started pushing it and started moving it. So it's very possible we'll see elevated numbers. Now, I was mentioning earlier, they've been really terrible this cycle on getting the numbers out on exit polling. So we don't have good exit poll numbers yet. We have some exit poll numbers yet on faith that are showing how people of faith voted for Kamala versus Trump. We don't have numbers yet showing what percentage of the voting populace was evangelical or people of faith. So that's a number they always keep. It's possible they decided this time not to keep it because they've been on this Christian nationalism kick about religious people don't need to be involved. Maybe they didn't even measure it. We cannot find it at this point, and that always comes out with exit polling. So at this point, we don't find any number. What I can say is the total turnout in this election was nearly 20 million less than it was 4 years ago. So turnout was down vastly, and that begs the question, was it up 20 million 4 years ago because they stuffed the ballot boxes and did the Dominion machines or whatever? Or is it actually
from
down?
The Civil War?
Exactly, that's right. Yeah, people from Civil War. Is it down this time because not as many people voted, or is it down this time because we had an anomaly with stuffed boxes last time? And we don't know how to answer that, and we'll never know how to answer that. So what this election was, it's more in line with what previous elections have been. To think that Joe Biden got more votes than any president in the history of the United States percentage-wise is not logical. But weird things happen. Maybe he did. I'm not going to say it was a cheat. I'm just going to say he got that many, and it's made question marks go up everywhere. But what we know now is this election is much more consistent with what 2016 was, what 2012, 2008, and it's about 20 million lower than what it was 4 years ago.
What are the popular vote numbers right now? Do you know those?
I did. Richard, I think it was 121. I think as well. I looked and I did not write it down. I think it was 143 last time. and I think it's like 120. Don't quote those numbers. I
Yeah.
don't guarantee those, but I do know the differential is about 20 million.
Well, and Trump, do you know Trump's numbers versus her? What was the margin there? About 5 million?
The margin right now is Trump has a popular vote lead of over 5 million. And that is continuing to grow as we get and go through Nevada, we go through Arizona and those other, and they're going to be counting ballots that, military ballots, they have grace on them. They have a certain period of time. So that number may continue to grow. It'll be a while before we know the actual final number, but there's at least a 5 million vote margin popular now. And I think that's one of the reasons last night we did not see a bunch of violence. They had the one riot in Seattle, and the cops put that down instantly. Credit to them. Kudos to the cops in Seattle. They didn't put up with it and put Antifa down. But I think had it been a really close vote, you would see riots going on. And I think they were prepared for that. But when you get the popular vote, that kind of diffuses everything. You can't say you stole the election when you get the popular vote.
Yeah,
and I think that was a help.
Yeah, it silences all those opponents of the Electoral College too, doesn't it?
It does.
And it adds to the political weight of the result and the mandate and everything else. But let's go back, can we, Dave, to let's go back to the potential of a realignment. What this election tells us about the direction of American culture and hope for the gospel and the discipleship of this nation. Trump seemed to sort of distance himself a little bit from a couple of hot button Christian issues, but I'm not sure if that was a strategic move or what. But what do you see here? Is there, Andrew, through the Lord prophesied the third great awakening has begun. And I'm really curious about what you're seeing here, especially amongst youngest bracket of voters, and the movement of black men towards Trump, towards more conservative position, and that sort of thing. What's really happening to the culture?
That's a really good question, and I guess the way to say is I saw some really good rays of light last night. I saw some good things going on, but I also saw some things confirming that what we're doing here is self-inflicted wounds. A lot of what's happened, for example, why is it that Trump ran away from the pro-life position when he was the most pro-life president 4 years ago in the history of the Republic? And it's because very clearly you've already had 7 ballot initiatives and not a single one. These are in red states, 7 ballot initiatives where the people in those states, in red states, said, we do not want a single restriction on abortion through 9 months. We have no restriction on abortion through 9 months. Last night, or what is it? We're 2 days, yeah, this is last night. So last night, there were 10 ballot initiatives on abortion. We lost 7 of the 10, including in states like Missouri, which is a Bible Belt state. We were able to win in South Dakota. We were able to win a half a win in Nebraska. And we're able to win in Florida, but only because Florida requires 60% to pass it. 56% of the people in Florida said we think there should be absolutely no restrictions on abortion. And the polling we did with Barna, and that polling with Barna was strictly among evangelicals. 42% of evangelicals said we think there should be absolutely no restrictions on abortion at any point in life. So that's evangelicals. So if your church-going people, 42% say there's no restriction on abortion, why in the world would Trump hold on to a position that is opposite to what 2/3 of the nation holds? And you can say principle-wise, and I think he's still going to do a lot of pro-life stuff. I just don't think he could be pro-life the way we wanted him to be. And I wanted it to be more pro-life, but I also read the stats, and I see the church is lousy on this. And I read the stats that only 2.8% of pastors address these issues from the pulpit.
Right.
So are people going to get it at school? No, they're not going to get this at school. Are people reading the Bible? No. Only 9% of Christians read the Bible on a daily basis. Only 4% of Americans have a biblical world. Where are they going to get it? They need to get it from the pulpit, but only 8% of pastors are speaking that. So I look at Trump and what he did with life, and I totally understand it. I don't like it, but I don't blame him. I blame the church for having given up the culture on that and for us not being the spokesman we should be on it. So how do we get that back? Well, we're looking at a generational kind of movement here. young people have been increasingly pro-life. The younger they are, the more pro-life they are. That's good, but that's going to take some years to get them into the mainstream. And then at the same time, they're also pro-socialistic. They're much more progressive in their thinking, although they're pro-life. So when you look, and here's some numbers from last night. 4 large age groups to look at from last night: the 18 through 29 voters, the 30 through 44 voters, the 45 through 64 voters, and the 65 and older voters. So those 3 categories, 3 of those 4 categories voted for Kamala over Trump. So in the 18 through 29 category, 55% of that group, what we call Gen Z, they voted for Kamala. In the 30 through 44 age category, which is Gen Y, millennials, they voted 51% for Kamala. When you get to the 65 and older, the seniors, the boomers, they voted 50% to 49% for Kamala. The group of 45-year-olds through 64-year-olds voted significantly higher for Trump, nearly 10 points higher, and that's where Trump got the victory. It was out of that group. Now, what I would point out here is the younger you are, the more pro-abortion you are in the voting last night. Why would that be? Because it's where you've been in school. So people who think, oh, my schools are fine. No, this is why we need school choice, because schools have turned into indoctrination centers. And the younger you are, the more pro-abortion you are, which is just not a good thing in America. So if I see that and say, how do we fix that? Well, we got to fix an education system and get some competition going and get some other things going where that you can have some view other than social progressivism, et cetera. So that's part of what I see from last night. There's a lot of solutions that have to be taken, and none of them are quick solutions. There's just nothing quick. We could fix it in 4 years if pastors started talking and we started mentoring young people. Everybody needs to have a relation with others. Jesus said, make disciples of all men. And most Christians right now don't like to engage other people. That discipleship process is kind of tricky and sticky, and you have to have debates and discussions, and you have to iron sharpen iron, and we don't like that. And so if we would do that as a church and do what the church is supposed to do, 4 years from now, we could have a whole different clientele on so many of these issues. Because there's a lot of people that would listen to us. And, you know, people often say, well, he got offended at me. I don't think I can talk to him again. No. Getting offended is really good news, because people don't change their mind until after their emotions have been shocked in some way. They have to think about it then. You made them mad, but they'll think about it, and it'll stay in their mind for a while, and they'll say, you know, I don't know. Maybe he's right about that. And a second discussion helps move them more in that direction. So people are so anti-confrontational right now, and I don't mean it in an ugly way. They just don't like making somebody upset at them in any way. And, you know, we used to call them snowflakes a generation ago, that you look at them wrong and they kind of melt. And we just can't be snowflake Christians. We got to have a little more backbone, a little more discipleship willingness, be willing to hang with people, talk to them, mentor them. That's a really long answer to your question, Richard, but that's some of the stats behind my thinking, at least on what I saw from last night.
Yeah, and I think we have to be careful about drawing too many conclusions about, you know, the realignment sort of thing. Yeah. And whether this is a permanent realignment or whether it's just driven by the crises that we're facing today and the personalities involved in this particular election.
That's right.
But at the same time, Dave, I mean, you know, Kim Clement prophesied that in 2007, Donald Trump would serve 2 terms in the White House. And then he's interrupted by this last 4 years of this Biden-Harris progressive nightmare that we've been through. And then if you look at what he has overcome to win this second term, beginning day one in office in 2017, with the Russia collusion hoax, 2 impeachments, you know, multiple civil and criminal lawsuits against him, including a felony conviction out of New York, and then, you know, the assassination attempt where his life was spared literally by millimeters. And one after another, as it seems like the hand of God came in and protected him for a purpose and a reason. It's not Donald Trump's, you know, inherent righteousness or anything like that. There's got to be something else going on. When you think on these things, does that give you hope? I mean, you know the history of America and God's intervention to preserve and protect this nation better than anybody. Are we seeing the hand of God again in America because He has a destiny for our country?
I think so. I absolutely think so. But I also think that we have to respond the right way. God has not only given us a window and a reprieve, He's given us a blessing. And just as Andrew talked about, this is the third Great Awakening. I will tell you historically, as a historian, Great Awakenings are some of the most contentious times in American history, and they are characterized by extreme hard work. They're not a time when you coast. You don't coast in a Great Awakening. The Second Great Awakening produced a civil war. How's that for polarization? So, we get the nation morally conscious, what's right and wrong, slavery is wrong, and it gets so polarized over the issue, although it's a clear biblical issue, it leads to a conflict. The First Great Awakening led to the American War for Independence because we stood on principles and said we are not going to give away our God-given rights, and there were people who wanted to take them. So a third Great Awakening doesn't mean we suddenly all get along with each other. It means a lot of conflict, but it usually means you have people with a backbone willing to stand for what's right. And that's usually what Great Awakenings do, is they clarify morality. And as they clarify morality, you're willing to stand for what's right, and that means controversy. That means all the stuff that went with the abolition movement and the pro-slavery folks and all the things they did to each other, pro-slavery going after the abolitionists, etc. What they did to John Quincy Adams. It's not fun, but it takes that to preserve the nation, to get the next generation thinking right, so they can take further steps when they come along. So anybody who thinks that, boy, Trump's in office, now we're going to get good judges, now we're going to get, Robert Kennedy and Elon Musk and all these guys are going to reform government. You think the other side's going to lay down on this and not fight back? Oh my gosh, you've seen nothing yet. Wait till you see what the media does. Wait till you see how many lawsuits come in. Wait till you see how they keep changing the logarithms on social media so that when you say something, it doesn't appear, but when somebody else says something, it does. That's the kind of stuff we have to expect. So I would say, I think we're in a great position. But if we take this as a time to sit down and rest and a time to coast, we will lose everything we've gained to this point. And that's what we can. This is the time to double down and work harder and get more engaged and do more. And that's what you see with George Whitefield and Charles Clay and Francis Asbury and Harry Hoosier and all those great preachers, Charles Finney. Man, they just doubled down when it got tough. And that's what all of us need to do. And so that would be my encouragement. I do think this is the hand of God. I do believe that for him to overcome everything he overcame in this election and to win with a mandate landslide. And by the way, just let me touch real quick. There were so many good things that happened last night at the ballot level. And I'll just run through. And by the way, the Amish turned out in awesome numbers up in Pennsylvania. They may have been the ones that swung Pennsylvania. And so thinking about the Amish having really elected Trump because they were the key vote in the key state that put him over the top, that's a lot of fun. Trump is your oldest president elected in U.S. history, and J.D. Vance is your second youngest vice president. So how about that for a generation gap, 2 gaps across there? But going through some of the numbers last night, we lost 7 of the 10 abortion measures, but we did so many good things. First time in my lifetime that all 4 states that were voting on illegal drugs voted illegal drugs should stay illegal. So states we've been losing that one for the last several ballot initiatives. We won all 4 of those last night.
Were those marijuana? Is that what was on the ballot?
Marijuana, and 2 were psychedelic drugs as well.
Oh, okay.
2
Mushrooms
were marijuana
and stuff. Yeah.
and 2 were psychedelic. And so, Oregon voted in psychedelic last time, and then they've had so many problems, the legislature took it out. So we could have told them it wasn't going to work, but nonetheless, voters rejected that. They rejected general neutral language, South Dakota. They're going to keep their gender statements. We had West Virginia banned physician-assisted suicides, which is a really great position. Every place they had jungle primaries was rejected. Every single place they went for ranked choice voting was rejected, except Washington, D.C. But that's probably 14 states on that. Nevada, of all places, said we want voter ID. We don't want anybody voting. I mean, it was conservative. If you look at the ballot initiatives, we won so many that are so conservative, and that tells you something about who showed up as well. And hopefully that says the nation is starting to shift more in that direction, because these are the policies they want to place on themselves, and that is so good for them to be able to do that. So I'm really excited about it. I think we have great opportunities. But I also think we're going to face opposition we haven't imagined of as we go through this. The other side does not want to roll over and play dead. They don't want to give up easily. They've got too much invested, so expect war. Well, and I don't mean that literally. I mean
No,
figuratively.
no. Right, yeah, of course, yeah. So an election, no matter how momentous it is meaningless unless the winner follows through.
That's right.
On the
That's right.
policy and agenda.
That's right.
Right? And
That's
so,
right.
and one of the biggest problems, we've kind of been hitting on the church here, but one of the problems we have as Christians for some reason, and maybe it's just ignorance, I think, Dave, we just don't think enough about practical stuff in the world and how to get things done. Mm-hmm. But after an election, when we win, we sit back and we don't think about it again until 4 years later.
Right.
But it takes a constant work and effort on the ground of people getting involved. And I'm just curious, I was watching Charlie Kirk's show last night. I was flipping between him and you, actually. And you see these young guys who are just complete data wonks. They know the system. They know the game. They've been working, 20-hour days for months. And when Pennsylvania was called, Charlie Kirk actually broke down and was crying a little bit. And the first thing these guys did is they stopped and said, y'all, we got to give thanks to God. God is the one who did this.
That's
and
right.
I mean, that was just so encouraging to me to see the hard work, the doing the nuts and bolts stuff, but also the spiritual element. And so I don't know if you're seeing that anywhere else or whether maybe, there's a glimmer of hope there, especially because of the age of these folks. And I was just encouraged by it. I wonder what you think.
No, I am too. I'm telling you, man, there is a group of thinkers coming up, Charlie Kirks and Ben Shapiro's and so many of those guys. And even what we're seeing when we do our summer trainings with young people 18 through 25, we're having better thinkers and more committed and more dedicated, serious people than we've had in 20 years. And there's something happening right now with this upcoming group. And it's like God has implanted in them something special. And they're responding to God and country. They think better than previous generations. They're more cogent, logical. They put more red flags up. They ask more questions. And I'm loving what I'm seeing, man. And here I'm sitting with all the white hair, but I love being with the young guys because they really challenge you now. And it's a lot of fun. And it's like the Charlie Kirk kind of guys that they're passionate about making a positive change and positive effect. And so I love it. I see something really good going with that, Richard. Absolutely.
So just in general, though, as we're moving forward here, Trump, he's not going to waste any time getting his things moving forward. Now, he won't be inaugurated. That's my phone. Sorry about that, everybody. But I'm just saying, what can we do even now before inauguration to continue this momentum and, help the conservative policy be actually implemented?
Yeah, this is going to be a real different start for this administration. He went in as a reformer last time, but it took him 2.5 years to figure out how the swamp really worked. He knew there was a swamp. He just didn't know how deep it was. For example, he thought the Pentagon, he thought if you're in the military, you love your country, you serve your country, and he had no idea that 2 and 3 star that 3 and 4 star generals are political appointments. 1 and 2 star generals, they earn their appointments because of military prowess. 3 and 4 star, that's a presidential choice, and it is for all generals. And that's why before Obama went out, he asked for the resignation of 800 different generals, and he got the resignation of 800 generals. He replaced them with his guys. So here comes Trump in on the heels of Obama. Guess what? He had a bunch of Obama generals in there, and they were stabbing in the back, and he didn't know that till the 3rd year. And so he has found out so much more. You can't fire federal employees because of the civil service stuff. So how do you get around that? And they have found ways to be able to do that. You can do it arbitrarily. You can flip a coin and say, hey, if it lands heads, everybody who's got a birthday in an even year, you're fired. Everybody who has an odd year, you stay. So you immediately cut it by half. But you can't go in and say your talent is wrong or you're bad or you don't work hard. We gave it to the unions, and that's a stupid thing to do with the federal government, but we can't fire people. Well, he's found ways now, and one of the things you'll see probably right off the bat is and the president comes in with 9,000 what are called Schedule C appointments. And Schedule C is, these are 9,000 presidential appointees. Now, when you got 2.7 million employees in the federal government and only 9,000 are appointed, that's a drop in the bucket. But They are the deputy secretaries and the secretaries and they're the heads of the agencies. And, there was 186 new agencies created by Obamacare when it came out. So he's get the heads of these agencies. And what they're planning to do is take these agencies and start moving them out of D.C. There's no constitutional requirement. They're going to move an agency to Fargo, North Dakota. Welcome to 40-degree below winters. That's great in Fargo. Who wants to go from Washington, D.C. to a 40-degree below winter in Fargo? You're going to have people who say, no, I'll find a different job. And they'll hire farmers in Fargo who love the country, and so we're going to move something to Amarillo, Texas. We're going to move it out to Beaver, Oklahoma. And they're going to start moving these agencies out of D.C. where the lobbyists aren't there and where that you don't have the pressure. There's so many things they've already got planned. And it's really structurally changing things. So we'll see. I know Mike Johnson, talking to Speaker Johnson, if he's reelected Speaker, they have great plans on how to go through and do things. I know, talking to people that are doing this for Trump, he'll come in with a wad of executive orders. First off, just repealing all of Biden's executive orders, then turning it back to the legislature. But you'll start seeing things move through the legislature we haven't seen in 6 or 8 years, because that filibuster rule that Woodrow Wilson put in back in the 1913 era, such a bad rule. It violates all the constitutional provisions given by the founding fathers. It doesn't violate the Constitution itself. Let me be clear. It violates the spirit of the Constitution. The founding fathers said it should be the will of the majority. And in the Senate right now, 59 votes will lose every day to 41 votes, and it should never be that way. But that's the way it is in the Senate. So you're going to see that change. I have so much optimism and hope, but I also know that means a lot of opposition. All of those monies, all of those unions, all of those people that are entrenched, they're going to yell about, oh my, I've lost my job, I can't support my kids anymore, and we're going to have all the cry stories. And it's all designed to get us to compromise principles. We need that stuff moved out of D.C. It's not the government's job to give everybody else a job and take care of your kids. It's our job to do 17 things that the Constitution says. Everything else belongs to the people and the states. And I think you'll see that in a very vigorous way from the very start. I think they'll be very aggressive and move very quickly.
Well, we know Trump's been very clear about immigration, about the wall, about all of that. He's been pretty clear about tax cuts and this sort of thing. But what else do we see specifically? So you've mentioned sort of the deregulation, breaking up the swamp. What else do we see on the agenda for Donald Trump? What's he going to do on the social issues and on education, for example, like getting rid of the radical transgender ideology in our schools with boys and girls sports and mutilating surgery on minors and this whole woke ideology that's going on?
He has a personal kind of motto: promises made, promises kept. And he did that in the first term. And he is on record now with a bunch of promises, and he said, I'm keeping track of them. But he ran ads about that gender transition stuff. He is absolutely opposed to that. He's not going to let the federal government do that. He ran ads that we're going to have federal school choice. If you get federal dollars, you got to have school choice. We'll give federal dollars to school choice. He's on record with that. And he's on record with so many things that we've all been wishing for a long time. And there are homeschoolers who don't like school choice. Okay, I understand. But let me just make the point. The Bible is very clear that free market competition is the way to go. And if you doubt that, read Matthew 20, Luke 19, Matthew 25. Competition always makes things better. And that's, the Bible is really clear even about competition. Prove me, test me, try me. As Joshua told the people, you can serve the God of the Amorites in whose land we're going. You can serve the God of the Egyptians from whose land we came, or you can serve the Lord God. That's who I chose. But you get choices. And that's the way the Bible always is. Whosoever wants to, come to me. If you don't want to come to me, that's your choice. That's the principle that we need in education. And so like here in Texas, homeschoolers may have been responsible as much as anyone for stopping the educational choice movement going through Texas. And you think it protects your kids, but what happens is you're going to have 88% of the state raised on wrong principles. And how does that help your kids when they're the business owners and they're the next generation of cops and everything else? And so I'm really big into school choice. So I think you'll see him follow through on that. I can't think of a single promise he's made that right now he does not intend to keep, or at least he's going to give it a hard shot at doing it. I don't
Well,
think he was. I mean, he keeps track of his promises. He does keep track of them. I think he'll fulfill them.
it's one of his greatest qualities. And we got time for just real quick, one more question if I can, Dave. Last time, 2016, Trump came into office and he had a list of recommended jurists to be appointed to federal bench from I'm forgetting the name of the lawyer group right now.
Federalist Society.
Federal Society, Ed Meese's group, really stellar job. Just one of the greatest things. Is he going to do something similar this time? Does he have the input of conservative groups on judicial selection, and what are we expecting there?
It's much better this time because last time he came in with Federalist Society lists, and a lot of them weren't as conservative as they should have been. And about the third year of his term, he found other groups that were very conservative, and he went to them. And they're the ones he's starting with this time. So they're people you would know if I were to tell you their names. Mm-hmm. And so right from the start, we are much better shaped with judges than we were last time. We got really good judges, but some of them were not nearly as strong as they needed to be constitutionally. I don't think you'll see that kind of an issue this time. And certainly having the Senate, man, every judge he nominates can go through when you have that number of Senate. But by the way, this may only last 2 years because the other side is going to squeal and holler and do everything they can to take it back in the midterms. And there has been no Republican who's had 4 years to do something since Calvin Coolidge. So you got to go back 100 years. Every other Republican has had 2 years, and the Democrats get the other chambers back. We would not want that to happen this time, but they're going to play like they've only got 2 years, and that's where they're moving.
Good. That's a good point to end on. It's not time to sit back. It's time to rejoice, but it's time also to get to work. So, Dave, thanks so much for coming on Truth and Liberty tonight. I really, really appreciate it and everything you did, and Tim and everybody leading up to this amazing victory. Thank you so much.
Love it, bro. Good to be with you. Appreciate all you do, Richard. Thanks, bro.
Thank you so much. And to everyone who's watching, thank you for joining us for this special live broadcast. Be sure to check out our page on gtntv.com and share your email with us so you can get a copy of Andrew's booklet, The Great Awakening. And God bless you all, and we'll see you again next time here on Truth and Liberty.